1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Soweto Gospel Choir. Thank you very much. You know, I don't have any wishes, Mom, of just singing like them. If I could just dance like them. And I can't. I have before, and they chucked me out. So, can you imagine being embarrassed that bad in front of the prince? So I decided not to try today. No, if you join me, then I'll try. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If there is one thing that I'm not good at, is protocol. So let me declare upfront that if I miss any part of it and I get it wrong, you know that I declared upfront that I'm not good with it. So let me just, at this point, invoke Deputy Minister Nel, who said that you no longer say all protocol observed, because it's very 90s. You say, consider yourselves protocoled while I observe you. So His Royal Highness Prince Henry of Wales and the British High Commissioner, Ms. Graça Machel and the members of the Machel and Mandela family here present, the Tutu Sisulu families here present, Chairperson of the Board of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Prof. Njabulani Ndebele, Mr. Ahmed Kathrada, Dr. George Bezos. And just to note that with Mr. Ahmed Kathrada, today is a special day for us because this marks the end of part of the journey for you with the Nelson Mandela Foundation's Board of Trustees. And we thank you for the service of 16 years to the Board of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. So in honor of Mr. Ahmed Kathrada, his book on Robben Island will be sold outside, but he's going to do the punting himself so that you buy it. The CEO of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, Mr. Sean Balton, the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, Osbongi Mkabela, the U.S. Ambassador Dr. Patrick Gaspard, Honorable Deputy Chief Justice Dr. Dikgamo Seneke, Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, Major C. Duarte, Mezanele Mbeki, who hates it when I do this, Dr. Trevor Manuel, and your partner. Thank you very much, Miramos, for coming. Dr. Moeletsi Mbeki, Dr. Richard Maponya, Madiba's friends and caregivers who are here present, our donors, the United Nations and other international agencies. It's at this point that I say, I'm done. I'd like to welcome you all to the Nelson Mandela Center of Memory, and to say that we are honored that you are here today. As I stand here today, I would like to particularly say to His Royal Highness that we are honored that you decided to end your trip here, because you came at the time that we're marking the second anniversary of Madiba's passing, a time that we're asking ourselves difficult questions as a country and as a global community about the level of conflict that we have in the world and the kind of things that are going on around the world and what Madiba would have said about those things. So we're very honored that you're here. But that's not my role today to speak about that. I'd like to welcome to the stage the person who's going to give us the lecture for the day on the second anniversary of Madiba's passing, Professor Njabulani Ndebele.
Thank you very much, Silo, for your kind words of introduction. And may I then recognize His Royal Highness, Prince Henry, and Mama Graça Machel, and other Madiba family members, and the many distinguished guests and excellencies who are here. And ladies and gentlemen, good evening to you all. I would like to thank you on behalf of the Foundation for joining us this evening to mark the second anniversary of our founder's passing. Since we gathered in December 2013 to bid farewell to Madiba, a great deal has happened in our country and around the world. I will refer briefly to 3 events by way of example. As we speak now, waves of people continue to migrate to Europe or North America, away from wars, famine, and poverty, and endless political instability. We think of racism in law enforcement in the United States that has attracted a great deal of global attention. Perhaps what has captured national attention the most in South Africa must be the roads must fall and fees must fall student campaigns. Much of the world have followed with great interest our student activism, aspects of which will be the focus of some of my reflections tonight. Indeed, tonight, as we recall the memory of Nelson Mandela, it is not time for sentimentality. The memory of Madiba enjoins us to face history squarely with rigor, particularly in the face of increasing assaults on his legacy. Only 21 years after a free and democratic South Africa came into being, against the background of over 100 years of what Oliver Tambo, back in the early 1960s while in exile in Dar es Salaam, described as the most profitable system of oppression on the African continent. The effects of that system today are persistent despite the political and constitutional efforts to change them since 1994. The global foundations of that system, more than 300 years old. We ought to know history rigorously, more so the history of our own country. 2 months ago in this auditorium, we hosted a dialogue with youth leaders from universities across South Africa. Many of them expressed the view that Madiba sold out black South Africans in the negotiations which enabled a transition to democracy in our country. More recently, we have heard the same view expressed by others, from desperate plight of the crushing nexus of poverty and inequality to the populist opportunists who exploit desperation. Allow me to a moment of recall. Alistair Sparks takes time in his book, Tomorrow is Another Country, with the subtitle, The Inside Story of South Africa, the Negotiated Revolution, to describe a meeting that took place in a private house in Johannesburg's affluent suburb of Harton, I'm quoting him, between three generals, Constant Viljoen, Tini Groenewald, and Cobus Visser, who represented the Volksfront, and the ANC, represented by Mandela, struggle-tested commander of the ANC's guerrilla force, Joe Modise, and Chief of Staff, Joe Nhlanhla. The meeting took place at a particularly dangerous phase of the negotiated transition. At that time, elements of the South African Defence Force seemed dangerously poised to begin an armed intervention. Mandela, with his characteristic candor when the stakes are high, is reported to have given the generals his frank appraisal of the situation everyone faced. If you go to war, he told the generals, I must be honest and admit that we cannot stand up to you on the battlefield. We don't have the resources. It will be a long and bitter struggle. Many people will die, and the country may be reduced to ashes. But you must remember two things. You cannot win because of our numbers. You cannot kill us all. And you cannot win because of the international community. They will rally to our support and they will stand with us. General Viljoen was forced to agree. The two men looked at each other and faced the truth of their mutual dependency. In reflecting on this meeting, I observed that nothing could be clearer, nothing more devastating in its logic and the clarity of inevitable consequences. Mandela's technique in this conversation or meeting is to concede to the relative strength of an adversary, a concession which buttresses the adversary's self-confidence. But the implications that follow the logic of the battlefield are devastating. They promise a low-value outcome, too stark to disregard. They guarantee a Pyrrhic victory of little worth to both sides. It is at that moment that mutual interest emerges and is further affirmed by an agreement to explore a different path. It should be clear from this that much more is at stake here than the often assumed sentimentality of rainbowism, or that which is also often attached to reconciliation, a concept accorded parliamentary status through an act of parliament taken by the rational collective of a legislative body. The lives of millions of South African people were at stake. So also was the future of an entire nation. It was a moment of difficult decisions. The moment required proven leadership, character, honor, intellectual and moral rectitude of the highest order. The one entrusted by his political party with the responsibility to lead this critical moment carried a mandate of his party and was able to convince opponents whose standing he respected to see his and his party's point of view. He carried out his responsibility with sincerity and conviction that were selfless, and his historical value is judged by many to be significant and recognized both at home and globally. These qualities did not spring out of the blue. They developed over time in an individual within an organizational and national context. They were to be observed and recognized with admiration by the oppressed who supported him, and grudgingly by the oppressors who also knew how formidable those qualities were, even in an adversary of theirs. This is how Oliver Tambo, a close associate of Madiba, described him. As a man, Nelson is passionate, emotional, sensitive, quickly stung to bitterness and retaliation by insult and patronage. He has natural air of authority. He cannot help magnetizing a crowd. He is commanding with a tall, handsome bearing, trusts and is trusted by the youth. For their impatience reflects his own, appealing to the women in the process. He is dedicated and fearless. He is a born mass leader. It strikes me that if, as Tambo intimates, there was a mutual trust between Nelson Mandela and the youth of his time, as a result of a shared impatience, then Madiba's relationship with today's youth may be expected to be different. The youth of today are mostly presented with Mandela as a leader whose thinking and general sensibility had matured through years of incarceration. He developed an integrative, real-life orientated vision of the kind he displayed at his meeting with the generals. Some of the contemporary impatience of today's youth with Madiba's maturity may be indicative of intergenerational relationships which, being out of synchrony, are not necessarily incompatible. The youth of today may need to retrace the steps of South African and world history to understand better the context of Madiba's period of impatience and determine what similarities and differences there might be between then and now. They might then be able to discern and even develop a social understanding with a concomitant political program and rules of engagement best suited to the times. They might even fruitfully ask what might be done with the combination of their impatience with Madiba's maturity in his later years. It could just make up for a most creative activist resourcefulness. One of the most forthright commentators of Madiba, Malaika wa Azania, makes precisely this point about the importance of a rigorous knowledge of history. And I quote her, "The narrative that Mandela is the liberator rather than one of the many contributors to our struggle is vulgar," she says. It is vulgar not only because it is rooted in falsification, but because it threatens to rewrite history. No greater injustice can be committed than to deny future generations the right to learn about their true history, a weapon needed for their own liberation. But at the heart of her article, Malaika cautions against the cult of personality and the deification of leaders. When such deification occurs, even political parties can deify their own leaders to the extent that they abrogate their responsibilities to hold those leaders to account. But there is much to indicate that even the older generations of South Africans also need to retrace their own steps of history with rigor. Then intergenerational interactions may take place within a context of greater shared knowledge. It is also about the power of experience and example in the flows of interaction between generations. And in this connection, we may ask some difficult questions. When leaders of our country can sometimes be perceived not to abide by the requirements of state institutions that they are enjoined to protect and advance, and by their own actions then undermine the Constitution and the rule of law, is it Nelson Mandela who taught them to cut the vital transmission of high value to future generations? And do such actions not lead to the despair of the young and the disappointment and deep sense of betrayal among those who have walked the difficult journey up to this point? And we want to observe further that there is no society in the world that does not function according to some system of law and customary conduct tested over generations of social practice, and as a result perceived to have resulted in sustainable benefits to the social order, and that these societal codes of law and conduct cannot be changed or altered at the whims of leaders. Otherwise, a dangerous arbitrariness is introduced into the workings of the social order. Does such arbitrariness and the lawlessness that it may engender not lead to frustration and the insecurity among the citizens of a country? It needs to be stated against this background that the Constitution, the reconstructive policies, radical legislation, and a host of institutions of democracy diligently put in place in the first 10 years of our democracy represent collectively a radical edifice of hope and aspiration. They are not to be trifled with at our whims. Indeed, it is not the institutions of Madiba that have failed us, but perhaps our own human capacity to achieve those solemn goals for which the institutions were created. Whenever we fail to abide by legally and morally constituted norms which were created through processes that all of us gave legitimacy to. It is by our rededication to the solemn aspirations of 1994 that will help us to get beyond the invidious moment in which all of us South Africans are still trapped in the present, that have deep roots in the past, in which some of us perceive themselves to be trapped in the impersonal logic of everything that they own as a result of that history, despite their best intentions, while others, the vast majority, trapped in the logic of what has been kept away from them, despite their best aspirations. It is the challenge of public discussion what and how much to give away, and what and how much to receive, if there has to be a giving and a taking. But there is another, even more critical part of the discussion. What will be done with what has been given, and what will be done with what is received? What partnerships of restructuring economic life will be forged for stronger bonds of citizenship as we search for answers to these questions? This part of the discussion of equity in the future is what Thomas Piketty so eloquently spoke to at this year's Nelson Mandela annual lecture. We have the responsibility to succeed to the highest levels possible where public interest invests its collective intelligence in public good for the greatest good. That way we may yet deal with the embedded structures of dominance over 100 years, which constrain our efforts, oftentimes severely, and which make us both resentful of such inherited structures at the same time as we are aware of just how much dependent we are on them. If there are any sellouts in South Africa and everywhere in the world, they are the ones who have stopped dreaming, who have stopped working, have stopped elevating the needs of the wretched of the earth above their own need for power, privilege, and self-enrichment, stopped walking the journey whose historic prospects energize at the same time as they may seem daunting. It is about this walk that Madiba said. The truth is that we are not yet free. We have merely achieved the freedom to be free, the right not to be oppressed. We have not taken the final step of our journey, but the first step on a longer and even more difficult road, the true test of our devotion to freedom is just beginning. The resilience of his legacy keeps saying, as he did repeatedly in the last years of his life, it is in your hands now, and it is our hands that must do the taking, the talking, as we keep walking. Finally, it is the mandate and duty of the Nelson Mandela Foundation to promote Nelson Mandela's legacy. But we do not expect that that legacy will always be praised. What we do think and deeply believe is that his legacy does play a vital and fundamental role in the unfolding of South Africa's future. We do believe that our deep respect for it is shared by many in this country and in the world over. And as we think of him 2 years after passing, there is an injunction on us to rededicate ourselves to that legacy. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Prof, for reminding us of our responsibility to hold on dearly to that legacy. And that legacies are not just given as a gift, but that they need to be reimagined all the time. Just to remind the Prince that Madiba said those words, "It is in your hands now," in the UK, when he was trying to retire one more time. And he said, it's in your hands now to help build a world that cares for others. As I introduce Mr. Kathrada, who actually needs no introduction to you, he reminded me that Madiba always expected that he should be told whenever he did something wrong. And he said the following about Mr. Kathrada. He said, "Walter and Kathy share one common feature, which forms an essential part of our friendship, and which I value very much. They never hesitate to criticize me for my mistakes, and throughout my political career have served as a mirror through which I can see myself." With those few words, Mr. K, if you can come and say a few words.
Thank you, Sillo. Mrs. Marshall, Prof. Ndebele, Deputy Judge President, my fellow bandit on Robben Island, and I can't forget the man who sent us to Robben Island, George Bezos. But in fairness to George, he reminds us he saved us from hanging, but he got life instead. Thank you, George. I have to say a few things about the coffee table book, Triumph of the Human Spirit. It tries to capture some of my 300 trips to the island. That reminds me, I'm looking at, you still have to come with me. My 300 trips to Robben Island, always accompanying people. Incidentally, I never volunteer to go there. I go by invitation. So I wish to recall some of the folks I accompanied, I had the privilege of accompanying to Robben Island, not necessarily in the order in which they came, but among the very first person I accompanied was Chelsea Clinton. She was still at high school, and what impressed me very much is that while at high school, she had read Long Walk to Freedom. not only had she read Long Walk to Freedom, but she remembered and could discuss Long Walk to Freedom. She was at high school. Other people I wish to mention, they may or may not be in the book, but I had the privilege of accompanying to Robben Island. Jane Fonda, Fidel Castro, Muammar Gaddafi. What I remember about him is that he offered to pilot the ship. So the skipper gave him a chance for the last couple of kilometers. So he had his, we were a bit nervous, of course, when he took over. Mrs. Thatcher, Arafat, all the kings and queens of the Scandinavian countries, Will Smith, Quincy Jones, Gary Adams of Sinn Féin, Morgan Freeman, Beyonce, but incidentally, I recently took the Cuban Five to Robben Island, and being the Cuban Five, when I came back, the media was waiting, and they asked me, you took the Cuban Five to the island? Are you excited? I said, no, I took Beyonce there. I hope Blade in the money doesn't listen to me, doesn't hear this. I can't leave out Deputy Judge President of the Constitution Court. I did ask him whether I can expose him. He wouldn't give me permission, but I'm going to do so in any case. The Deputy Judge President was in charge of studies. And in that capacity, a lot of the study books and other books came through his office. And I can remember him, I can't use the word smuggling. I can remember him passing on to us illegally some of the books that the authorities would not allow. So, Deputy Judge President, my apologies, but I'm talking of another life. Yeah, and the other person I had the pleasure of accompanying was Riyad Musa, the comedian. I complained to Anand Singh that he had to get the comedian to take my part in Long Walk. But he said, Riyad Musa said in one of his stand-up comments that Mandela was in jail for 27 years, but Kathrada, being an Indian, asked for a discount. And he got a discount of 1 year. Now I should mention this because for 14 years in jail, we were not allowed newspapers. So we had to do all kinds of things to keep ourselves informed. Soon after our arrival there, the Deputy Judge President and I were writing exams at the same time, so we met up, and he quietly passed on something to me. It was an illegal message from the communal cells to our section. But then I want to mention a young man, a third-year medical student, who came there, sentenced to 5 years, And being young, I thought I should smuggle a letter to him to put him at ease. You know, he was 21 or something, and had to tell him not to be scared of prison. But that note of mine did not reach him. In fact, it reached the authorities. And unfortunately for that, I was sentenced to 6 months solitary confinement. But it was worth it. Yeah. And a little bit about Madiba. When we landed on Robben Island, he said, "We are no longer leaders. We don't make, we don't make policy, and we don't give instructions to the people outside." Chief Lutuli is still alive. Chief Lutuli, Oliver Tambo, they are our leaders. They make policy, they give instructions. Ours is to concentrate on prison conditions. When we landed on Robben Island, 8 of us were sentenced to life, but our 8th colleague was white, and he was kept, Dennis Goldberg, he was kept in Pretoria with other white colleagues. 7 of us were woken up middle of the night, handcuffed, leg irons, taken to the military airport of Pretoria, and they took off the shackles, put us on the plane, and the next morning we landed on Robben Island on a very cold, rainy morning. And the first thing we had to do is to change into prison clothes. Now that's where we met with apartheid once again in prison. I was given, being Indian, I was given a long trousers. Madiba and the other Rivonia accused, Governor Mbeki, Walter Sisulu, our leaders and our elders. In fact, Walter's like a father to me. Because they were Africans, they had to wear short trousers. The rationale behind short trousers, that in apartheid years, all Africans were regarded as boys or girls. So you had little children talking, "Oh, my garden boy, my kitchen girl." Boys, of course, wear short trousers. But in 3 years, the clothing was equalized. But when it came to food, in the morning we had the same food, porridge, soup, coffee. I got a bit more sugar than Madiba because I'm an Indian, but less than Dennis Goldberg. But Dennis Goldberg was white and he was in Pretoria. I got a quarter loaf of bread every day. Madiba got bread for the first time after 10 years. But having said that, I must put the facts right. In B section, where we stayed, about 25 of us, completely isolated from the rest of the prison community, about a dozen of us were either Indian or colored. So in our section, at least, we could pool all our food together so that in our section, at least, we had the same food. Our first reaction, those of us who were Indian or colored, was to reject this preferential diet. But Madiba dissuaded us. He said, "You'd be wrong to give up what you've got. You've got to fight for equality on a higher level, but don't give up what you want, what we've already got." So we had to listen to him. But in prison, of course, the 4 of the most senior leaders of the ANC in prison, Mandela, Sisulu, Mbeki, Mhlaba, all 4 of them had high blood pressure. But when it came to work, we had to dissuade Governor Mbeki from coming to work with us. He was 20 years my senior, so we said, no, he should stay. Walter Sassoon, you can't stop him. Walter insisted on coming out to the quarry, where we worked with pick and shovels for 13 years. It was difficult work at the beginning. Every day we blisters and bleeding hands for a while. But we got used to that work, and it meant we could go out to work every day at a quarry, meet in groups, and for 14 years we didn't have papers, so when I used to smuggle papers every now and then, that was the place to give the news. Lastly, about papers, we did everything possible to keep ourselves informed. We don't call it steal, we call it repossess. Brother September was our favorite priest. He used to have long sermons, but one day a fellow comrade of ours, Henny Ferris, saw the Sunday Times sticking out the brother's suitcase. So he helped himself to the Sunday Times. But I was by Madiba and the so-called the leadership called the High Organ. They gave me the job of communications, illegal communications. So when the newspaper was stolen, it was handed over to me. So I had to go in with the Sunday Times and take all the risks. But one can go on, and I shouldn't bore you with our present. What I want to end off with is that the leadership, the four of the most senior leaders of the ANC, Madiba, Walter, Govan, Raymond, they led from the front. Every hunger strike we had to dissuade government from taking part, but the others took part in every hunger strike. Quarry work, pick and shovels, they were there. Everything. They were equal. They led from the front. And that is what kept our spirits up. Those of us who were younger, that kept our spirit. Our leaders led by example. And I can just end off by expressing the wish that the younger leaders of today can carry out the example that the Mandelas and the Sisulus and the Bekis and the Mhlabas carried out under very difficult conditions in prison. Thank you very much.
To get more of these stories, you can purchase a copy of this book. Tonight it's usually 1,000 rand. Tonight, because Mr. K is Indian, he gave us a discount. So I think he says 500. So which is half. Let me at this point ask His Royal Highness to come and say his few remarks. His Royal Highness.
I'm not sure how I'm supposed to follow that. But thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Firstly, I'd like to thank Madame Michelle Grosser for inviting me to join you all here this evening. It's a huge pleasure for me to be here at the Nelson Mandela Center for Memory in the company of those who knew him best to remember Madiba. It is not for me to try and put words It is not for me to try and put into words the impact that President Mandela had on South Africa or a generation across the globe. Those far more eloquent than I have already done so. However, I was fortunate enough to meet Madiba a number of years ago, and I have treasured that memory ever since. Although I've been to South Africa many times, this is my first official tour on behalf of the Queen. I've been keen to see how Mr. Mandela's values and his legacy are inspiring the next generation and shaping the future for South Africa. I've visited a number of fantastic organizations over the last 4 days, supporting some of the most disadvantaged young people across the country. These organizations, although very different, are united in ambition to unlock the huge talent amongst youth in South Africa, regardless of background or circumstances, and crucially on World AIDS Day, the status of their health. These organizations, which include the Nelson Mandela Foundation, are empowering the next generation of engaged South African citizens. This innovative Center for Memory opens up history to help guide the future. I am sure Madiba would be pleased to see such great work being carried in his name, giving inspiration to so many. I also know that President Mandela worked tirelessly to protect everything that is special about this beautiful country for all future generations. To that end, I was pleased on this trip to lend my support to the conservationists who are fighting to protect South Africa's natural heritage, especially its critically endangered animals. Much of this work is a burden that South Africa bears on behalf of the entire world, and there is gathering momentum to support you in this urgent task. I was pleased to be able to discuss this with President Zuma this morning and share my hopes for the future. I can think of no better way of ending my visit to South Africa than by joining you here this evening to remember Madiba as we approach the anniversary of his passing. I know he is missed by a generation, a nation, and most keenly by his family. However, he will never be forgotten. I would like to end by thanking all the South Africans I've met over the last few days for their incredibly warm welcome and his hospitality. I look forward to seeing you again soon when I no doubt visit this beautiful country again. And now I have to catch a flight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. By the way, that last bit was not a joke. He does have to catch a flight. So if we can release him, and then Mrs. Grasa Machel. Yes, if you can all sit, and then Ms. Machel will come back and address us, having seen him off. If you can continue seating, and Ms. Machel will come and address us.